Well, hi guys. Here we're taking a look at Hoover's solution, as we call it, for the Great Depression. How much of a solution it was is really to be debated. Um, but part of the problem with why it was so difficult to come up with even a plan of action is because even Hoover's own advisors, his own administration, they disagreed about what was the actual cause of the depression. And so, if you don't really know what the source is or what the cause is, then it makes it very difficult to create a solution. Now, there were some who felt that, hey, look, we really shouldn't do anything. This economic downturn is simply a natural cycle. It has happened in the past. Remember all these sort of panics that we've had in the past, and it'll happen again in the future. So this is just a sort of natural thing that, yeah, it's bad, but let's not try to totally do something drastic. We know that eventually it will fix itself. And so there was sort of a tendency to say, well, yes, it's terrible, but what can we really do about it? And part of that was because Hoover firmly believed that it was not the government's job, and I love this line here, to relieve people from the responsibility of helping their neighbors. And so this tells us that Herbert Hoover's his expectations were that private business, private people, private charities, those were the ones that would provide for the needy, not the government. And that explains Hoover's reluctance to help individuals directly. Hoover also believed that helping people with direct aid from the government, meaning here's food, here's money, here's a place to live, that would ruin people's spirit of self-reliance. And you could say, well, okay, maybe people will start to depend on the government for everything, and we don't really want that. But on the other hand, you could say, well, if you're dead and you're starving to death and you die from starvation, there's not really a whole lot of good self-reliance is going to do. So interesting. And to make things worse, Hoover would not give release to people, but he did provide food to starving livestock. And if you're a parent and all you want is a chance to work to feed your family, but you can't even do that, and the government's not helping you, but then you turn around and look, and the government is feeding livestock, but letting your children starve, yeah, it's not going to go over pretty well. Well, eventually Hoover does start to act, at least limited. He finally relents and starts limited government intervention, such as Public Works Project. I'm sure you've heard of the Grand Coulee Dam, and if not that, then the Boulder Dam, which of course changed to the Hoover Dam eventually. There's also the Federal Farm Board, which tried to keep crop prices stable by paying farmers not to sell their crops. And again, it sounds bizarre, but if you remember, part of the problem was that the farmers were producing so much, and you know that when supply increases and demand stays the same, it just lowers the prices. So the idea here was, hey, let's not make as much crops, produce as much crops, and that'll reduce the supply and that'll stabilize and maybe even raise the prices. Another attempt was the Hawley-Smoot tariff. And as you know, a tariff is a tax on an imported good. And the idea behind this was to make American goods more appealing to Americans because they'd be cheaper. They wouldn't have the tax on them like imported goods. But instead, other countries in turn raised their taxes or their tariffs on American goods, and we got a slowdown in global trade, which only served to worsen the Depression. Another thing that Hoover did was the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and it was supposed to provide loans to businesses, insurance companies, and railroads to help ensure they would survive. And this makes sense from the standpoint that without any business, you're not going to have an economy, and certainly you need to have stable, thriving businesses. But what made it kind of bad was that people were upset because they viewed this as helping big business while letting the average person starve. So yet again, the big rich groups get everything, and the average person, sorry, nothing left for you. And that at least was a perception. Well, finally, push comes to shove, people get really upset, and eventually civil unrest occurs. One of the ways was through penny auctions, when homes or farms were foreclosed, and they're being auctioned off. People would physically prevent others from coming into the auction, where only a group of like-minded people would then bid only a few cents for the property and return it to the owner. This doesn't last that long. Eventually, the law enforcement was called in, but it did. It had some mild success. And finally, the bonus army, which was a group of World War I veterans who were promised bonuses for their wartime service. It wasn't due for several years, but they marched in Washington, D.C., demanding their bonuses now, saying, look, we'll be dead in a few years, so what good is our bonus going to do to pay for our tombstone? No, we need something better. Um, but Hoover and Congress would not give in to the demands, and eventually most veterans left, but some stayed. Hoover then ordered troops to disperse the veterans, and they did so violently. And seeing World War I veterans being attacked by the country's own military was not a good sight. And for many, this was the final nail in Hoover's coffin, and that's why FDR, or one of the reasons why FDR won the election. All right, thank you so much.